Hello and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS. The big news for today is the Indian government's efforts to ensure that our relationship with the Gulf nations remains robust as it has been in the past few years. Now, a lot of efforts have been taken by the Indian government for individual Gulf nations to ensure that the ongoing diplomatic crisis is resolved as soon as possible. In this video, we will be discussing about the significance of the Gulf nations for India. What efforts has India taken to ensure that these nations remain in the good books of India, and also how exactly are these nations helpful for India in terms of employment, remittances, etc. But before we do that, here is a reminder of the knowledge series that had been started on our YouTube channel, especially for the upcoming mains examination. As you know, this knowledge series started from the 6th of June, in which every single day at 10 a.m. and at 3 p.m. you would have live classes of important topics from all the subjects across the UPSC syllabus. Here is a list of topics for the first week of the knowledge series. Do make a note and do join in for as many of these as possible, because this is going to be a live class exclusively on our YouTube channel of BYJU'S IAS. Now let's begin the topic for the day. Now, as you all know, the Gulf Cooperation Council has a lot of significance for India. India has enjoyed centuries of great relationship with these nations in this particular region, which we call as the Middle East. These nations include Iran, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE, Kuwait, etc. And India has ensured that we maintain good relationship with each of these nations individually, even though these nations might have certain differences amongst each other. Our relationship with these nations is mainly based on a few aspects, such as oil and gas, trade, and employment to the thousands and lakhs of Indians who go to these nations each year and send a lot of remittances back home to India. Now, because India is such a huge importer of oil and gas, our trade with these nations is extremely huge. In fact, the Gulf Cooperation Council, which has UAE, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Oman, Qatar, and Kuwait, has been one of the largest trading partners of India if you consider all these nations as a single group. UAE, especially amongst all of these nations in the Middle East, has been the top trading partner of India. In fact, UAE was India's third largest trading partner in 2021-22, just close to US and China. The UAE accounted for 6.6% of India's total exports and 7.3% of India's imports. The same is the case with Saudi Arabia, which is India's fourth largest trading partner. Iraq also finds a place in the top 5 trading partners of India, while Qatar has been India's most significant supplier of natural gas. The overall trade numbers with Qatar may not be that high, but when it comes to natural gas, Qatar is the one country that supplies India the most amount of it, and that is why its relationship with India is extremely significant for us. As expected, India is hugely dependent on these nations, mainly for our oil import. As you would know, over 80% of India's petroleum demand is actually imported. And since the nations in the Middle East are some of the largest exporters of crude oil, India has to maintain great relationship with these nations. In fact, 239 million tons of oil petroleum imports worth $77 billion were imported by India last year. Amongst all the nations from whom India actually imports oil and gas, you can see here countries such as Iraq, Saudi Arabia, UAE, all from the Middle East feature in the top 3. And that is why it is extremely essential for India that we remain on good terms with these nations individually, so that they don't really strike a hard bargain for India. Because at the end of the day, there is no alternative for any country such as India when it comes to importing oil and gas. In 2021-22, the largest exporter of oil to India was Iraq, as we can see here, followed by Saudi Arabia, Iran. Although India has been trying to diversify our oil imports by taking oil from nations such as US, Nigeria, even Mexico, Russia, and even Brazil in some quantity. But as you can see, for the bulk of it, we are still dependent on a handful of nations from the Middle East. This graph also shows you how India has been trying to diversify our oil buying across the world. In fact, the government has said time and time again that right now, India buys oil from almost all of those nations around the world which are ready to supply oil. However, the flip side is that even after all this diversification and all the efforts by the government, as you can see, we are still highly dependent on the nations of the Middle East for our oil supply. Over half of our oil imports still come from the Middle Eastern nations only. It is not just about the oil. It is also about the remittances and the employment that these nations provide to the Indian citizens. We have about 3.2 crore Indians, including the people of Indian origin, who are working outside India. Out of these, if you actually look at the NRIs, Gulf countries are the ones that host most of the Indian NRIs. UAE has about 34.2 lakh Indians working there. Saudi Arabia has about 26 lakh. Kuwait has over 10 lakh, etc. And all of these send huge amounts of remittances to India. So much so that in 2020, India was the largest recipient of remittances around the world, followed by Mexico, which had almost half of India's remittances. All of that has been possible because of the huge Indian diaspora that works in these Gulf nations and has been able to find jobs much easier as compared to the other nations. And that is also why the government of India cannot afford to jeopardize our relationship with the Gulf nations. Realizing this, the Prime Minister also since 2014 has made special efforts to ensure that our relationship with these countries remain as robust as ever. In fact, the Prime Minister has touched base in almost all nations of the Middle East multiple times since 2014. He visited the UAE in 2015, 18 and 19, while Abu Dhabi's Prince came to India in 2017 and 2018. The Prime Minister also visited Qatar and Iran in 2016, Saudi Arabia in 2016 and 2019. The other nations visited by Prime Minister Modi in this region include Jordan, Palestine, Bahrain, and even Oman. In fact, the Prime Minister became the first Indian Prime Minister to visit the Palestinian territory of Ramallah. Thus, all these outreach efforts have been taken by the government, realizing the fact that the region holds special strategic importance for India. Thankfully, the leaders of the Gulf Cooperation Council have also reciprocated in kind with a lot of visits to India. We had the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, we had the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, Qatar's Emir, and even the Kuwaiti Prime Minister and Bahrain's King visiting India at different points of time. The Prime Minister has also visited some of the most popular mosques in these nations during his visit, including the Sheikh Zayed Grand Mosque in Abu Dhabi and the Sultan Qaboos Grand Mosque in Muscat. Thus, you can see that the Indian government attaches a special importance to its relationship with the Gulf region and thus is trying to take special efforts to ensure that any diplomatic crisis between the two sides is resolved as soon as possible. This is all that you needed to know about our relation with the Gulf nations. Thank you so much for watching the big news.